Hi, this is Cassie Brighter for Empowered Trans Woman, and I have with me today Angela Bridgman, who's just announced her candidacy for the Senate in North Carolina. Hi, Angela.
Hi, Cassie. How are you?
Very good. This is an honor. This is quite a thing that you're doing. I really congratulate you for even just for entering the race.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. I've talked about running for office like for the last 10 or 12 years, but it wasn't until more recently that the opportunity and the circumstances really kind of gelled together in the right way.
Uh-huh. So yeah, that's something that I definitely want to ask you about. I remember following a couple of years ago the race of Wendy LaMay, who was also from North Carolina.
Yes, Wendy and I are actually good friends.
Oh, that's really neat. Did you follow her race?
Not only that, I volunteered with her campaign. I donated to her campaign.
Mm-hmm.
She would have actually been my legal representative had she won.
Oh
Okay.
my gosh. Okay, so tell me
Right.
a little bit
And
about.
it was an interesting situation because I was also at the time a precinct chair. Okay.
Oh,
So as a precinct chair, I had to remain neutral in that capacity,
oh,
right?
I
Because it's in
see.
a contested primary. But there's nothing against me personally doing stuff, right?
Right, that's true. But
And
let
in
me
my
ask you so.
capacity as a precinct chair, I had to advocate all three candidates equally.
Of course.
And then when she did not win her primary and Linda Coleman did, then I, as a precinct chair, helped Linda Coleman because that was what I was supposed to do.
And that makes perfect sense. So let me ask you one thing, which is, how did you get involved in North Carolina politics in the first place?
Well, I've been an activist almost as long as I've been out. In fact, you may know Terry Ann Summers. She was on 2002's TDOR list. She
Mm-hmm.
was basically who taught me everything I know about activism. So, you know,
Gotcha.
still miss her.
It's
But
important to remember the people that kind of paved the way for us later.
yeah, yeah. But I mean, I was involved with her when she was doing the whole Winn-Dixie thing with the trucker Peter Euler.
Oh my God, that takes us back a little bit.
That takes us back into the 90s, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, it must be interesting in general to be a transgender woman in the 90s in North Carolina.
Well, I wasn't in North Carolina until 2014. I started out in Pennsylvania, but then I moved to Kentucky.
Uh-huh.
And I was on the front lines in Kentucky for the battle for the Fairness Ordinance in Louisville.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
I
I
have to
was,
ask you something.
yeah, go ahead.
Looking at you from the high ground of the western state of Oregon and before that California, this is going to probably sound, I don't know, a little privileged or whatever, but why would you move to Kentucky? Why would you move to North Carolina, being a transgender woman?
Well, I moved to Kentucky because I had lost my job in New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
I had started this lawsuit. I was having a difficult time finding re-employment in New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
And a friend of mine from Kentucky says, "Look, I could use some help out here with my elderly mom.
Uh-huh.
Why don't you come out here, rebuild your life a little bit, help me take care of my mom. We can both get some benefit out of it." So literally, I moved to Kentucky to be driving Miss Daisy. I mean, whenever I see that movie, I still remember Janet. And we really were like Janet, and we really were like Miss Daisy and Hoke in the movie. At the beginning, we were very embattled, and at the end, we were like this. So I mean, that movie just she became like a second mom to me, actually. So
Oh, that's wonderful. But I want you to I want to challenge with you the stereotype um that I see, and I don't know if other people see, but that I see about North Carolina, right? Because when I think of North Carolina, I think of Charlottesville and I think of the United
well,
Right.
in fairness, Charlottesville's Virginia, but
True, but what I'm trying to say is that I'm thinking about a region of the country, and I would include Alabama with this, and to some extent Kentucky, where transgender rights are not known to shine. Uh, I'm thinking, well, more specifically about North Carolina, I'm thinking about the bathroom bill,
well,
which
you
has
you
been the big
do know
brouhaha.
Okay, you do know that 32% of LGBTQ identified people in America live in the area that you would define as the South?
Hmm. I didn't know the statistic, but I knew that it was roughly about 1/3.
Right, right. So, I mean, we're working on that. And North Carolina is actually, the perception of North Carolina from people that are not here is different from the reality that is here.
That's what I'm trying to ask you about, because
And
most of what I know about North
we've been very
Carolina.
badly gerrymandered to the point where we have 10 Republicans in the Congress and only 3 Democrats representing North Carolina right now.
Yeah, I've noticed that. But so I wanted to ask you.
And we've gone through a number of redraws of our state districts as well as our federal districts. I mean, seriously, we're going through another federal redraw right now. I have not moved from where I lived since I moved to North Carolina. Yet I started out on a federal level. Now I started out in the 13th congressional district. I'm now in the 2nd congressional district, and with the latest proposed maps, I would be in the 5th congressional district.
Oh my gosh,
and
that
all
is
of that
crazy.
5 years, and I'm not the one that's moved.
That is crazy.
Right.
But so my perception about North Carolina is primarily stemming from the bathroom bill, because that, I have to tell you, this is something that, and I don't know, perhaps it was extremely naive of myself, but I was aware of the discomfort that going to the bathroom would bring me, because I was pretty new in my transition back in 2016. So I was aware of social constraints. I was aware of challenges strictly because of my comfort level, but it never really occurred to me that this would be a legal matter. So this threw me for a loop.
I'll be honest with you. I mean, by the time HB2 passed here in North Carolina, and by the way, I want to preface that by saying that I've lived in 7 different U.S. states in my life, and I can tell you that there are haters and bigots in every last one of those states, and there's also a lot of very good, decent people in all of those states, and a lot of those good, decent people are right here in North Carolina.
That's really good to hear.
I mean, this whole thing, we are not this, that wasn't just a slogan. That was not just a slogan. You know, we had a lot of support from a lot of people here in North Carolina. And of course, the HB2 debacle is still ongoing, which we can talk about a little bit more if you want to. But my point was, I came out in 1993. I've used ladies' bathrooms for 25 years. And I never thought twice about it. I never thought twice about it until HB2 happened. And I didn't have my surgery until 2002. So you can do the math.
Yeah, and that's a really good point.
And my male anatomy was using ladies' bathrooms for 9 years before my surgery.
Right, so that's a really good point, is that it's not so much divided by legality. It also has a lot to do with the decency of people and how inclusive the local people choose to be.
You know, if people just all mind their own business, I mean, I'll be honest with you, when I go to the bathroom, I mean, all I want to do is get in, do my thing, and get out as quickly as I can. But what they don't understand is that we're not wired the way men are wired. We might have been born anatomically male. Okay? I mean, I don't even like the word transgender for myself, because to my perspective, my gender never changed. My gender was always my gender, and that was always female. And that's how I'm wired.
We're still struggling with language, and we're going to continue struggling with language for a while. That's a good point, and I've thought about it myself.
Is that we're not doing in a bathroom what these men imagined that they would do if they had the opportunity.
Exactly, and a lot of this really comes from a lack of empathy, because they don't relate to our condition. But however, all of this just takes me back to the same point, which is, it might be that North Carolina's reputation is a little bit undeserved. I was actually a little surprised to find out that the governor of North Carolina is a Democrat. I didn't know this.
Well, I don't know. I have a difficult relationship with Roy Cooper, and it goes to the whole HB2 debacle. Okay, it really does. I mean, you know, I'm a Democrat. I'm a candidate for office. I do support Roy Cooper. Okay. Certainly, Roy Cooper's better than anything the Republicans can put up. But I do hold Roy Cooper accountable for the fact that we're still suffering in North Carolina under HB2, and that's not what he promised us
Yeah, the settlement was
transgender
what, in
community
July,
when
right?
running. So I mean, I still hold him accountable.
Absolutely. And
Okay,
actually, there
I'm
was a
gonna support him,
case.
but I hold him accountable.
I don't know if you heard about this. There was a case of a woman who, even during these elections, was asked for ID because of the fact that the way that they worded it is her face doesn't match her ID because she's trans.
Yes, that happened in Mecklenburg County.
Yeah, and very
Yeah, that
recently,
happened.
yeah.
That's the Charlotte area. I think it was in Hendersonville. I want to
Hmm.
say it was Hendersonville.
Yeah, somewhere in that area. So it's still a little
Right.
bit of a dicey kind of a region.
Yeah, actually, I've had some trouble with voter ID for that very reason.
Hmm.
But what I say is like, if your ID, your picture, your name doesn't match your presentation,
Hmm.
it means you're probably not full time yet.
Hmm.
So just for the exercise of voting, isn't it easier to just look like your ID? I know it sucks, but if I've got a male picture on my ID and I've got a male picture, I've got a male name on my ID, and my legal voting registration is under my male name, can't I just appear as a male, do the voting thing, go home, and go back to being myself in my regular life? I mean, voting doesn't happen that often in our country,
I
does it?
understand what you're saying. We're getting
It
it.
just would make things easier. I mean,
We're
it's
getting
not
into a
something we should have to do,
we're getting
but
into a tight spot because there is the practicality and the logistics versus
right,
a person's sense of self and a person's gender
absolutely,
dysphoria. So I always try to be compassionate about that because there is, I
yeah,
suppose, the the practical solution that I might think of, and then there's the question in my heart of whether or not I would be able to live with that. So I leave that
right.
up to each individual person. But I see your point. Sometimes um, but I
We,
remember
but
having
we do
awkward
have this
moments.
law that we have to deal with, and that just because we're transgender, that doesn't give us dispensation from the law, is what I'm saying.
True. Okay, I remember having these awkward moments where, for example, getting pulled over by police and having to announce before I hand over the ID, that ID is not going to reflect my current presentation, and then we would have to have an awkward conversation. Sometimes you're kind of caught in a
As you can well imagine, me being out in the 1990s, I had that a lot more frequently.
yeah, exactly, yeah.
I
Okay,
mean,
so
I will say this too about North Carolina, because you were talking about North Carolina being perceived in a
mhm,
particular way. Okay. Now, I actually live in what you could call the red part of Wake County, if there is any. In fact, the district I'm running for is the only district that is included in Wake County that's not currently held by a Democrat.
uh-huh.
Okay. I am the first openly transgender person in the history of Wake County to be elected a precinct chair.
Wow.
I live in a little town that is near a place called Lizard Lick, North Carolina. That's a real place. And
Okay.
that's not the area that you would expect Wake County's first openly transgender elected precinct chair to come from.
Yeah, that's very accurate.
And I can tell you that as a precinct chair, I have access to certain data, which is why now that I'm an announced candidate, I have to be on leave of absence as a precinct chair.
Yeah.
And I made that official yesterday. I'm officially on leave of absence because I should not have access to data that I would possibly use in my campaign that I would have been obtaining as a precinct chair.
Let me
Okay?
ask you this. How were you treated as a precinct chair so far?
I've had nothing but support here in Wake County. There's been no problems.
Oh, that's really good to hear. So
But what
that's
I wanted to say is I have access to this data that says in my precinct,
hmm
we are 43% Democrat by registration,
hmm
28.3% Republican by registration, and 28.3% independent by
Oh,
registration.
that's a higher degree of
It does
independence.
not look that way from the ground level.
It doesn't.
It does not look that way from the ground level, but
Hmm
it's there. And now that there's an area called Wendell Falls
hmm
that was recently annexed by the town of Wendell, and that's going to change the dynamics here in this part of the county.
hmm
You know, right now, I mean, in the 2019 municipals that just happened here, we didn't even have a Democrat on the ballot.
Oh
And
my God.
I don't think that's going to be the case in 2021.
Yeah, it seems like there's a big shift happening. Something that's been really notable, and I want to touch on this for a second, is we've just had elections and we've had a pretty amazing rainbow wave. We've had
Hmm.
over 80 candidates, LGBTQ candidates, win big across the country. And
Right. Most notably, Danica Rome, who now becomes not only the first transgender person to be elected to a state legislature, but also the first transgender person to be reelected
yeah,
to a
I actually want to give a big shout out to Danica because she's
absolutely. And I'll
proven.
tell you what, I got to say this. I envy her position in history right now because Virginia just turned blue,
Hmm.
and we only need one more state to ratify the ERA. Consider that probably Danica Rome's going to have that vote, which will finally get the last state we need to ratify the ERA.
Oh my God.
I mean, I am so envious of her place in history right now, and I sure wish it could be here in North Carolina.
No,
I
that is
really.
amazing. But I think that one of the key things with Danica is that she was a very unlikely win, or at least she was perceived to be a very unlikely win. Um, the fact
Well,
that
she
she
was running against a 12-term Republican incumbent, Bob
exactly.
Marshall. In fact, Bob Marshall, the guy she defeated, was actually the guy in Virginia that tried to craft a North Carolina-style HB2 bill for Virginia.
Yes, he was. I want to get
So it
back to
was
him
pretty
in a second.
interesting that he was the one that got beat by a transgender woman.
Yeah, he
And
probably
I
doesn't feel
remember,
really good about it.
the night Danica won the first time, the press and everyone else was trying to get her to say something horrible about Bob Marshall.
Oh, I
And
remember
she
that
handled it,
well.
she handled it so perfectly. She says, no, I do not insult my constituents. Bob is my constituent now.
That was very, very classy. But I want to get back to Bob Marshall in a second. But what I want to say is that Danica was perceived as such an unlikely winner. Uh, the fact that she just got reelected proves that it wasn't a fluke, proves that it wasn't any kind of. It really proves that they definitely want her and they want her to continue doing what she's doing.
Yeah.
I also
And
want
it's
to
because
acknowledge.
she ran on issues that people cared about.
Exactly. I also want to acknowledge we have Jerry Cannon, who is a New Hampshire state representative. She got reelected. Lisbeth Dessel in Melrose,
Yes,
Massachusetts. She got reelected, I think, to a school committee.
that's right.
Then Amy Wichtendal, I don't know if I'm butchering her last name, in Iowa City council member. And we have two new winners, which is Donna Price got elected to Board of Supervisors in Virginia, and Holly Ryan in Massachusetts, councilwoman. So there is a little bit of a wave, and I'm wondering if you can speak to what is this floodgate of opportunity that seems to be happening to transgender people. What is the cause of this? Is it the fact that more transgender people are getting involved in politics?
Well, I think that people that are transgender that have been getting involved in politics have been paving the way for those who follow.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I liken this back to when Carol Moseley Braun was the first woman elected to the Senate,
Mm-hmm.
as I'm old enough to remember that.
Yeah, that's
And
a
it
while
was a
back.
big deal. And it was a big deal when that happened. But nowadays, women get elected to the Senate all the time, and it's no big deal.
Yes.
And I like to think that we as transgender people have arrived when somebody like me or somebody like Danica can be elected, and it's no big deal.
Absolutely.
Because
And
we're just people. We're
what you
just
brought
people.
up is really important. The fact that Bob Marshall was running such an anti-trans campaign, a hate campaign, and Danica was running on the issues of the people. Danica was talking about potholes.
Right. Route
So,
28, yeah.
okay, what that brings me to you, which is tell me a little bit about your platform. Tell me a little bit about the things that are important to you in North Carolina, the things that you want to change.
Well, frankly, I'm all about fighting injustice
Mm-hmm.
wherever I find it, okay? And there's a lot of injustice in North Carolina. It's economic, it's social, it's educational. There's just like a lot of voices that have not been being heard in North Carolina, a lot of people have not been having their concerns heard or their challenges addressed.
Uh-huh.
Right? And I want to do that. I mean, for example, 600,000 North Carolina citizens right now don't even have access to basic health care.
Oh, wow.
Because our legislature won't even talk about expanding Medicaid. That's, in fact, actually was kind of at the root of why we didn't pass a state budget.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I think we can do better than that as a state, because we can expand Medicaid, which the federal government pays most for. We can deliver health care to these people. At the same time, we can create jobs. We can reclaim money we've already been sending to Washington for other states to use in their Medicaid programs. And we can keep rural hospitals, health clinics, and doctors' offices open, because more people will be able to go see them.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure where the problem is with expanding Medicaid.
Well, one of the big concerns that people have is that small businesses might not be able to afford the new platform, and therefore small businesses would close down, which would lead to further unemployment. What do you think about
How does that work? Because Medicaid is not something that's a state program.
Mm-hmm.
It's not money that employers are paying out that they haven't already been paying out in the form of their taxes to begin with.
So their finances wouldn't alter in any way.
Right, exactly.
That's really good to hear. Okay, tell me a little bit about...
Medicaid does not call for a tax increase on businesses.
Okay, that's really important to point out.
I myself am in business for myself, and I'm aware of these things, right? In fact, actually, the state legislature recently passed a cut to the franchise tax.
Oh, wow.
Okay, and that's a little bit of a misnomer, because it's not just franchises that get hit with this tax.
Mm-hmm.
The franchise tax is what S corporations in North Carolina pay, because we don't pay the traditional corporate taxes that a C corp would pay.
Mm-hmm.
So what we pay is the franchise tax. LLCs also do that, okay?
Right.
So you got small businesses like mine, and we don't benefit a whole lot from a cut in the franchise tax, really. I've actually worked out the figures for myself, and I save about $28 a year.
Okay.
But a big law firm that bills in the millions every year, who are an LLC and an S corporation, you see what happens.
Absolutely. I want to ask you, if you were going to pare down your campaign into 3 bullet points, the things that matter most, you would say, okay, so Medicaid would be one of them. What would be a couple others?
Healthcare is a very important issue to me.
Mm-hmm.
I would also say the expansion of rural broadband.
Okay.
That's a very important issue, because broadband has literally become a necessity in modern life.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're in an area that's not served by broadband internet, in fact, my area is not served by broadband right now. I can get Google Fiber if I move a mile down the road.
Oh, no. Okay. Just a mile, that makes a difference.
Exactly. Okay. Now, health records are all done over the internet now,
Mm-hmm.
right? Businesses don't expand into and move to areas that are not served by broadband, so there's a missed economic opportunity for these areas. And in fact, the latest precision agricultural equipment even depends on a broadband signal.
Oh.
So if you're not served by broadband, and you've got a big farm out in a place that's not served by broadband, you can't even use the latest precision agricultural equipment.
Oh,
That's
my
a real
gosh.
problem. Now, here in North Carolina, we have a county called Wilson County
Mm-hmm.
that actually established their own broadband network. It's called Greenlight,
Mm-hmm.
and it's available to people who live in Wilson County. Now, after that happened, our legislature passed laws preventing other counties or municipalities from setting up their own networks in the way that Wilson did.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In other words, basically protecting the big providers like Verizon, AT&T, Spectrum.
Oh, so
etc.
I was thinking, what would be the money interest? And there it is.
Right. Now, this past session, there was a bill filed which never was voted on, so it's dead now.
Mm.
Okay, but it was HB 431, I believe. It was either 431 or 413. The numbers are not in my head exactly on the top. But I think it was 431. But it was called the NC Fiber Act,
Mm-hmm.
which would reverse that previous ban and would allow counties or municipalities to either buy or lease equipment to provide broadband to their areas.
Okay, so we have health insurance, we have rural broadband, which I'm really glad that you highlighted as an issue because it hadn't been really in my field of vision. And then what would be the third thing?
Well, as a pretty large agricultural state, we have a lot of areas that are not served by broadband, and it's very important to know that, like I said, the latest precision farm equipment, agricultural equipment, requires a broadband signal.
Absolutely,
okay?
Yes.
It's a big issue here in North Carolina, and really, if you want to know the truth, I think it's nothing short of the rural electrification of our century.
Absolutely. No, it's really, really important. It's basically bringing it to the 21st century. We are beginning to run a little bit short in time, so I want to get a couple of things that I think really matter. So, well, first of all, I wanted to give you the opportunity to say a third bullet point if you have one ready for me, and I know I'm putting you on the spot, but
actually I do.
Yeah.
I do. Okay. I would say that it is injustice, and this is all wrapped into something I'm calling educational parity. Okay. It's injustice that a mother who works and pays taxes has her tax dollars support some private schools here in North Carolina that are not bound by the federal IDEA guidelines and therefore can close their doors to her special needs child.
Oh, wow. And that totally puts Betsy DeVos in my field of vision.
Right. And it's injustice to be stuffed into a too small classroom with too many students, often with not enough or even no desks at all because there's no room for them, and to have the state legislature tell us that they can't build more classrooms or hire more teachers to relieve that load. And it's an injustice to teachers who go and continue their education to make themselves better teachers, and then to have the state legislature take away the master's degree bonus in the teacher salary package.
Absolutely. So education is your other point, and I think that's really important. I'm glad that you shared that with me. I wanted to ask you, because I'm hoping that trans women are watching this across the country, and that they're following this rise of trans women in politics. I want to ask you, how would a young trans woman get involved? How would a young trans woman learn how to throw her hat on the ring, how to get involved, and how to become prominent in local and then, regional and state politics?
I would say that the first thing you do is you show up.
Mm-hmm.
Everything starts at the precinct level. And that's where I started as a precinct chair.
Uh-huh.
Everything starts at the precinct level. You show up. You get involved. When people need help, you show up.
Mm-hmm.
And you help. Mm-hmm. And if you do that and you get a reputation for that, you move on up. And then when you need help, people show up for you when you need help.
I like that.
So that is what I would say to start with, is show up. And it starts at your precinct level. If you can't find your precinct information, contact your county Democratic Party. They'll be able to hook you up and tell you who your precinct chair is and get you involved, because that's where it all starts. It starts at the precinct level. It starts at getting out the vote. It starts at being available when we need somebody to canvass, get out the vote, when we need people to phone bank.
And I think that's also an important part.
You just decide one day, oh, I'm going to run for this and expect people to support you, because they're not going to do that.
So you touched on something else that I think is really important, which is participate in somebody else's campaign and learn about the campaign process.
Absolutely.
Canvas for somebody
as I did with NDA, for example, and as I've done as a precinct chair for every other candidate that was in our precinct. I was very active in Linda Coleman's campaign after Linda Coleman defeated Wendy Ella May.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I was very active in the campaign of Terrence Everett, who actually, I'm in a split precinct, and my precinct is served by 2 different state representatives on the House side. But Terrence Everett actually ran for and won the seat that I wanted to run for myself in 2018, last cycle. But I got gerrymandered out of that district and into District 39 instead of 35.
I wanted to ask you next about gerrymandering, and what do you think the solution might be to gerrymandering as a national problem?
Mm-hmm.
And then
I spoke back in September at a public hearing at the North Carolina Senate about redistricting. So my public position and my official campaign position are very clear for anybody that wants to look it up. And I support the enactment of legislation similar to HB 69, which was filed here this year and is another one that, by the way, died when the session ended. But it would create a nonpartisan citizens redistricting committee. The bottom line is that we need to take the map drawing job away from the elected officials and the politicians that have a vested interest in the outcome.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's very well put. So I'm glad to know of that initiative.
It's not good no matter which party engages in gerrymandering. It's not good.
Yeah.
I mean, our primary right in this country, outside of the right to life itself, I would say, is a right to vote. And that vote should count. It should matter.
Very much so.
And if you have elected officials choosing their voters, then you have people whose votes are not counting.
Yes, exactly. No, I think that's probably the best solution I've heard so far. Okay, so the last question I want to ask you is, what's your strategy for winning this thing?
Well, I am running a campaign of the people. Right? You know, people could vote for the polished, regular politician that they've done for the last 50 years and tell me how well that's worked out for them. Okay? One of the things we're doing, starting next Saturday, I'm having my first one of these events, and it's called Coffee with the Candidate. And I'm going around my district to different coffee shops, and I am inviting people to come and just talk to us. I don't believe that people should have to go to an event and pay $50 or $100 to have access to their local representatives or to their candidates for office. Right? And I'm doing this all around the district. And I'll talk to anybody. I mean, if somebody comes up to our table and for whatever reason doesn't have money on them, can't get a cup of coffee, heck, my campaign will buy you a cup.
Oh, that's sweet. I think that, yeah, it's important to make a difference between...
I think what people want right now, I think more than anything, what people want is they want someone who will just plain listen to them.
Yes, very much so.
Let them get their concerns out.
And you know what? I want to bring it back to the way that we started this interview, which is trying to get Skype to work.
Yeah, we had an adventure there, didn't we?
Which is just to get the technology to function the way that we want to. And you mentioned the slogan of your campaign. So what's the slogan?
Right, which is make it work.
Make it work.
Well, the slogan is make it work. And this came about because actually I was talking with somebody about my campaign, you know, and I said, well, you know, as an out transgender woman for over 25 years in an often hostile society, we have to learn how to take things that do not work and make them work anyway. So make it work came out of that. And I would say, too, that outside the box thinking is something I think that we really need in our country right now. And outside the box thinking, you'll agree with me, it's a survival skill for transgender people. I'd like to take that creative problem solving to the 18th district here in North Carolina, and I'd like to help the people of the 18th Senate district in North Carolina and across the state have better lives.
I really like that very much. And you're right, there are specific skills. and survival skills that we learn by virtue of being marginalized, by virtue of having a difficult experience, which
Yes.
actually we can port over to help other marginalized people, to help
Correct.
people in general.
Right. And that's why my campaign is focusing on those people whose voices have not been heard, whose concerns and challenges have gone unaddressed. Because,
Mhm.
I mean, I know what that's like as a transgender woman. I mean, I'll tell you that every day that you suffer injustice is the longest day of your life.
Oh, yes, it is.
And I want to fight injustice. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. And it's not just injustice against the LGBT community. We're just one of many. I mean,
Exactly.
less
You
than
know,
1%.
there's a sentence that I really like, which is "a rising tide lifts all boats," and so
Yeah, what
many
do you
times
do
in
if
our
you're one of the people
society.
that don't have a boat? What do you do if you're one of the people that don't have a boat?
Very true. Yes.
Right. It's like one of those phrases I like, actually, and I like this one because I wear boots a lot myself. It's
Mhm.
kind of my look, and it's all about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. I like to tell people, well, it helps if you actually have boots, which of course I do. But
Yeah, but no, it's very true. What I was trying to get across is the notion that the more that in this society we help people who are the least of us, and I'm not a religious person, but this is very much part of the Christian belief, which is the least of us,
absolutely. Right.
and
As you do to the least of us, so also you do unto me. Exactly.
and the more that we do for the least of us, the more that we find that our society gets more just, our society gets more comfortable for everybody. Well, maybe not for the elite, but it gets more livable for the most of
I've
us.
said before, I've heard it said before that religion done properly should comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable.
I like that very much. That's a great
I mean,
Martin
I don't know
Ward
if you ever
statement.
have you ever heard of John Pavlovitz by any chance?
Yes, I follow him.
Okay, John Pavlovitz is here locally in Raleigh. I mean, I've got him on speed dial. I love him. I've loved him. I've been at his services. Okay, and that's something that John Pavlovitz says about, religion should comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable.
I think that's a wonderful sentence. Angela, we're going to be wrapping up. Are there any things that have been left unsaid? Is there anything that you'd like to tell our listeners?
No, I think we've pretty much covered everything. I mean, I would just say that if I'm so honored to be elected, less than 1% of anything that I'm going to be dealing with has anything to do with transgender issues. So that can't be what my campaign is about.
Mm-hmm.
My presence on the campaign is all that's really needed there. I don't intend on running away from the fact that I'm trans. I fully embrace it and my campaign. But in the end, we need to be talking about the issues that impact the most people in the 18th district. Right?
This puts me in mind of something really funny that Hannah Gadsby said, because Hannah Gadsby came up with her, and I hesitate to call it a comedy special because it really was a philosophy special and a powerful, poignant look at society, which was Nanette. And something that she said, which I found really funny, is she said that a lesbian came up to her and told her that there wasn't enough lesbian content. And she said, well, I've been on stage the whole time. And I didn't stop being a lesbian at any point. So that's very much what you're saying, which is by virtue of being out there and being a source of change and improvement and progress in our society,
Yeah.
and we happen to be transgender, that's a statement in and of itself.
Absolutely. And I want to springboard off of that for a second, just to say that just because I am trans, nobody owes me anything.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that really bothers me is the people that have been in office for years and years, they get to feeling like they're owed it because they've been there, that they're entitled, get where they come from or why they're there. If that ever happens to me, then the voters owe me the favor of booting me out of office because I don't deserve it anymore. If I forget why I'm there, if I forget where I come from, if I start feeling like I'm owed that office, that's exactly the time I need to be leaving that office.
A powerful statement for justice and against complacency from Angela Bridgman, and I think that's a really good note to end this interview. Thanks so much for the honor of interviewing you, and good luck on the campaign trail.